Alors, bonsoir tout le monde.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special meeting this evening because we're going to be focusing only on the budget. So without any further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, everyone. And as every year, we present our budget proposals to the Council. We started back on October 16th when we heard presentation from external commissions. You'll recall the budget process continued last week with the presentation of capital budgets. And this evening, it's the term of the operating budgets, the water and sewer and the general operating budgets. Before I hand it over to our treasurer, I'd like to list the key elements on which the municipal administration has based. Oh, excuse me here. Is on which the administration has based its budget proposals. Our proposals are in line with the priorities of the Municipal Council, those of the strategic plan, as well as those of the master plans. While we've maintained our core budgets to continue offering and maintaining our quality services, we've also invested in the environment, public transportation, housing, immigration, and the future development of our city. The significant growth in the population over the past year has led to an increase in our operating costs. However, this growth is also accompanied by an increase in property values for our residents. The direct impact of the increase in the tax base enables us to absorb the additional costs and lessen the impact of the increase in property values for our residents of the former territory, and to maintain the planned increase that was part of the catch-up plan presented last year for our residents of the former Greater Lakeburn and Scoudouc LSDs. So I would now invite Mr. Thériault to present the budget 2024. Good evening. Good evening, Your Worship, councillors, and staff, colleagues, and public. Here we are again. We're now going to look on the operating budgets this evening. My colleagues are going to participate one after another here, and especially when I talk about the one-shot expenses. Last year, we had started with water and sewer. This year, we're going to do the other way around. We're going to start with the general operating budget. So this year, as you can see, in 2023, it was a $1.46 rate, but we're proposing to drop that by 3 cents to 1.43. Those are for the former Dieppe, if we can call it that, before the annexation of the Greater Lakeburn and Scoudouc LSDs. So, as Mr. Melançon had just mentioned, their rate is going up by 5 cents because their rate is 51 cents. Now, in terms of the shared purchases, it should have been 74. So if we take the $1.43 and divide it by 2, no, and I need my second slide here to explain it better. The residential rate is made up of 2 amounts: the shared services amount that everybody pays, no matter where you live, be either in the LSD or the former Dieppe territory, and the local services rate that are really specific to Dieppe residents, that doesn't include the former the LSDs. Now, these are worth 74 cents, and just in passing, they were 77 cents last year. So the city of Dieppe has reduced it from $146 to 143, but the rate in the LSDs goes from 77 to 74 cents. So the gap between the rate to pay and the actual rate is actually going down. Now, for the shared services, here, these are government services, for example, other than transportation. So any government services, and you remove public services, engineering, you have recreation on leisure services, emergency measures, fire services and police, and planning, development, and waste management. So, and from this, you subtract the revenues from the pool, for example, in the arenas, to come up with the 74 cents. So, of the $1.43, 74 cents of that, which is the amount that represents shared services that everybody has to pay for because everybody can benefit from it. On the right-hand side, you can see the local services, and this is the rate that the former LSDs are not going to pay. So this is 69 cents for them. And these include services that are road related and transportation, because it's the province that is responsible for that. And the province is going to tax them for that. There's another 41 cents that's added to that, to what we saw earlier. So they're going to pay 59 plus 41 cents. So it's about $1 they're going to pay. There's also the transfer of the costs of water. Water and sewer doesn't go that far, so they're not going to pay for that transfer that we're going to come back to a little later. The debt and operating capital is not included. Others, such as transfers to the reserve, grants, bylaw enforcement, and the transfers from the reserve is removed as well. So this rate has been determined to be 69 cents that they will not be paying. Now, and I've been showing you this slide for the last few years, and I add a year each time. It's just to show you what a house was worth in 2021. Let's say the average cost of the house was about $300,000. What is it worth today? And what is the impact that on property tax? The first line at the top, you see the initial assessment of the house. The first year in 2021, let's say it was 300,000. It went up 15% in 2022. In 2023, it went up 25%. And in 2024, I still don't have an exact amount yet because the province has not yet posted these figures on their website. It will be done in January. So I'm just assuming it's going to be 8%, but it might be 12, it might be 5. I really don't know. So I just for this presentation, I put it as 8%. So a house that was worth $300,000 back then is now worth about $465,000. Now you can see that the assessment for tax purposes, that's in the middle row here. You can see that the government has a cap it's capped at 10% any raise. So the house, which was worth 300,000 in 2021, only goes up 10% in 2022 to 330 to 363 in 2023. So and that's what the residents are going to see on their bill. They're going to see the real value, the real assessment of their house by Service New Brunswick, but there's a protection against these increases, and then they will see the rate that they will actually be invoiced for. So a house that is worth $465,000, let's say in 2024, will have a reduction of $66,000. That's because of the protection against the increase. So their assessment for tax purposes would be $399,000. At a tax rate of 1.43, it means that the property tax would be $5,700 approximately. But if it would have been $120 more if we had kept the 1.46 tax rate. And if you have any questions, please feel free, interrupt me at any time. Now, in terms of the non-residential rate in 2024, the first column, you can see the residential rate that determines the non-residential rate, and it's multiplied by 1.65 to come up with a non-residential rate for commercial properties. So it becomes $2.40, or well, it goes from 240 last year to 236 this year. So it's a 2.1% reduction. Last year, the provincial rate was 1.85. I think it's going to remain the same, but again, these figures have not been published, so I think it's going to remain the same. But at the end of the day, there'll be about 5 cents that the non-residential taxpayers will be saving on their tax bill. Now, let's go to the budget. Budget this year, there's an increase of $8 million. We went from 71.9 million to 79.1. Our income, the property tax went up by 6.8. Grants went down. We used to receive $1 million, if you'll recall. We used to receive about $1 million, but this has been reduced by 20 to 25% every year. The province is trying to bring this down to zero. So for this year, it's about $250,000 less to give us $700,000 and other revenues. Now, in the next few slides, you'll get further details on these figures. For the property tax, now I put for Greater Dieppe. I didn't know how to talk about Dieppe compared to the and the two LSD. So I called the Greater Dieppe. We received 65.1 million. That's what was last year in 2023. That's how much we received in property tax. The tax base in Dieppe, the former Dieppe territory, has gone up by 8.1 million or 12.5%. This 12.5% increase is divided into two. There's the residential part and the non-residential. The residential has gone up by 16%. Earlier, I mentioned that it had gone up by 8%, but I estimated that. I said, okay, I know it's gone up 16%. The problem is that I don't know what the value will have increased and what the new construction has increased. So I did half and half, and I took a figure of 8%. So that's where my 8% comes from. And we'll get some more figures on that in a little while. But right now, we know that there's been a 16% increase for the residential sector, which is about 60 or 65% of the tax base. The non-residential went up by about 5%. So it's from 16% to 5%, which gives us the 12.5% overall. And then if we reduce the tax rate by 3 cents, that's for residents, residential and non-residential sectors. But the former LSD and the Lakebird and Skuduk, they went up by about 200,000. So that brings us to the 671.9 million total, which is an increase of 6.8 million. Now, I talked about other revenues. We're talking about an increase of 1.4 million, where it went up mostly in the transfers from the reserve. It went up from 1.63 million to about 1.1 million last year. Now, when you see this 1.63, that's very strategic. It means that these are one-time expenses that are paid from the reserve itself, so it doesn't touch the operational side of the budget. So I take this money from the reserve, and we'll see the details of these 1.63 a little later, but this is the strategy behind it, if you will. Now, I jumped over the surplus of 2022, which was similar to the one in 2021 earlier, but it's 600,000. Revenues from the ice services went up by 260,000, and the aquatic center revenues went up by $140,000 to 0.65 million. And I'm sure you'll remember that COVID, which is still present here today, but during COVID, that there were some major decreases in the use and the revenue of the ice services and the aquatic center. So the 2023 budget was based on 2022, which was right in the middle of COVID, so it had been underestimated, if you will. But now we're in a post-COVID period, and the arenas are at full capacity. We have a fourth ice surface that is increasing the capacity as well. That wasn't there in 2022. So there are increases because of that. Building permits, and we thought that we raised those by $250,000 by remembering that we're still in this record-breaking period here. For the last 3 years in a row, we've had about $1 million worth of building permits. We had budgeted $500 or $600,000, but we we didn't increase it too much here in order to make sure that we still reflect the reality. The destination tax here, the destination levy that we have on the 4 hotels here in Dieppe is going up. Now this is on the gross side. So this is just on the gross side. And a little later, you'll see that there's still a 76% that goes to destination Dieppe Moncton. And then you have an amount for other revenues here. This is an increase of $200,000 for a budget of $750,000. There's we have our investment revenues because interest rates have gone up, which means that we receive a little more, and also some rent amount from the fire hall, for example, where we rent out the second floor, and the Rotary Park. These are additional revenues that are worth $200,000. Now, on this slide, you can see how the budget went from 71 million last year to 79 million this year, an increase of $8 million. First of all, we're starting with at $71 million. I subtract the transfer to the reserve last year, as well as the one-time expenses of 2023, to come up with a base budget of 69.4 million. This is because the other expenses I mentioned were really one-time expenses, so they're not recurring. So I remove those to come up with a base budget. And from this base budget, then what are the expenses that allowed us to reach 79.1% budget? Well, there's transfers to the reserve, 2.1, the one-time expenses in 2024. And I have slides that'll explain the 4 or 5 expenses that make up these one-time expenses. And then there's some new items in 24 or 5 of them that we'll come back to later, either of 1.5 million, asset management, 1.2 million, and existing expenses, 3.3. Let's start with the reserves. Last year, we had a budget of $800,000 in the reserve. We had transferred 800,000, and this is from the financial plan. The financial plan tells that all surplus that is carried over from one year to another has to be transferred directly to the reserve, so that we don't have to balance in the budget. We take it, we put it in the reserve, and then when it's in the reserve, we look to see if the operating reserve is at full capacity, and if yes, it's transferred to the capital reserve. That's done at the end of the year, and we're going to go through that exercise in mid-December. So the first 600,000 into 2023 were surpluses from 2021, and there was a $200,000 where the surplus that were forecast for 2023 that were transferred to the capital reserve. Now it's $600,000 in 2024, so the surpluses were the same, pretty much the same, 2021, 22, 1.5 million, and we're forecasting 0.6 million, 1.5 million to the capital reserve in 2024. So in 2024, that's the difference is between the revenues that we're expecting and the expenses that we're expecting. So it's a 1.5 million more. Now, this year, there was work done. There was some capital expenses in 2023 that we had to delay because it came up much more than what we had budgeted. So there were some things that we couldn't do, or we had to go get funds from the reserve in order to do these projects. So that 1.5 million will be taken into account there. Now the one-time expenses, $1.6 million, I have divided them into 2 sections. The first and the first 3 that you see here are expenses started last year, but that are ongoing in 2024. Either they were expenses that weren't made in 2023 or they're ongoing. The signage in the downtown area was supposed to be done in 2023. It wasn't done. The money was put back in the reserve and it's going to be used in 2024. So it was a one-time expense in 2023, but the project wasn't carried out. So it's back here this year. The fire costs, now we're in year 4 of 4 for this one. If you'll remember, several of you might remember that in 2019, the water and sewage had a deficit of $2.7 million. So that 2.7, according to the rules, the accounting rules of the province, we can spread it out over 4 years. So 2021 was the first year we absorbed $675,000. And in order to help water and sewage, the general operating budget had to send $250,000 per year for a million total in order to absorb that loss in water and sewers. Now, this is the last year of that deficit that was absorbed. And the $135,000 here for renovating, building renovating, you saw a presentation last week. There was $465,000 that had been budgeted for renovations compared to $350,000. So this is the $135 difference that is going to come from the reserve. Now, my last part, this is the 1.1 million for one-time expenses. I'm going to ask my colleagues to explain them to you as they appear on the screen. Starting with Mr. Melançon, please. So, yes, the first one here is the feasibility study for the Dieppe market. You know that this is one of the jewels, the pearls of the downtown area. So we're exploring the possibility of seeing if we can bring it alive 7 days a week instead. So we're proposing a feasibility study to prepare a file in order to be able to get funding from the two levels of government. So this will allow us to proceed with this study and to find a group that will be able to manage this whole file until the delivery of the feasibility study. The second one, we received the figures from Statistics Canada on the francophonie, and seeing as our strategic plan and our vision is that we are a francophone municipality offering bilingual services in French and English, we propose to come up with an action plan containing different initiatives to help Dieppe play a leading role amongst francophone municipalities to try and attract people to move here, to come here. So we're going to put aside $100,000 in order to develop an action plan with concrete actions that we will propose to you next year. The third one is our strategic plan. Marie-Claude Landry, well, it's time to review our strategic plan in 2024. So we have to retain a consultant to start the work. And we want to go a little further this year and get measurables. We want objectives that are measurable. We want to be able to see how we are progressing and if we're meeting our strategic plan. And so that is a summary of what we're proposing here. Next. Good evening. I'll go over the next four. So the protection of the electric system at the Uniplex. Over the last few years, we discovered that there's a variation in the electrical current, and there's some interference. Sometimes there's a greater current, sometimes there's less that comes into the building. And so there we have a little work to do there to make sure that we protect all of our electric network within the building in order to avoid any damage caused by surges. You know, things can short out otherwise. Now, the demolition of the Dover Center, you'll remember that we are building the sanitary services at the Dover Park, and in that building, we've included a room for community groups, including Soccer Dieppe, Dieppe Soccer, and others. This is a building that was built in 1951. We assessed the building in terms of its safety. We had to close it last year for a certain amount of time because it was falling apart at certain areas. The degradation was, there was structural degradation as well. So we recommend the demolition. of the center. We had recommended it several years ago, but we were able to maintain it at a reasonable cost for these few years. But if we want to keep it, we have to renovate the whole structure and everything. And I don't have a figure for you here this evening, but we recommend the demolition of the center as it exists. The next one, it's a panel. Did I jump one? Did I skip over one? Oh, see, sorry, renovations at City Hall. Well, that says it all. The two new offices have to be added here at City Hall. And at the Aquatic Center, it's a control center that controls the quality of the water. It's a very humid atmosphere there. There's salt that is used as well. And that causes corrosion, and the control panel has to be replaced. That was the fourth one. Thank you. Councillor Le Boutillier, question? Yes. Yes, I have a question on the previous items. I'm trying to understand this feasibility study, $180,000 for the market. Usually, there is a corporation that manages the market, isn't there? So is it us here at the city that is going to take over? Well, the market belongs to the municipality. It's one of our properties. So we feel that there is more potential than just holding a market in that building. So we'd like to take over the financial responsibility of this feasibility study to identify the full potential of what can be done, of what kind of activities, complementary activities could be added. Everything is on the table. Would it be affordable housing on upper levels? Is it rental space? Everything is on the table, and perhaps we'll come up with something that will be proposed to municipal council, of course, but it would really be complementary to the downtown. Yes, but once again, are we going to receive architectural plans, or what are we going to get? We're going to have concept plans in order to ask for financial assistance. We want to have a total package to allow us to ask for financial assistance. We don't know yet if we'll have a final figure. Yes, it's more than just a feasibility study. Yes, thank you, Councillor Melissa. Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question on the demolition of the Dover Center. Was there an estimate done of the costs involved in renovating it? No. No, but in the report we received, because we had the building assessed, just the entrance or the back door, we had to invest $190,000 just to make the doorway safe. So I mean, everything is up to code today, but everything is okay. But the total assessment of the building, we had asked what we needed to do to maintain it open. We didn't ask what needed to be done to renovate it, but it was just to maintain it open. But this 190,000, that was just for one item out of a number of them. And I think the figures even go up in the second and the third year. Yeah, because if we had wanted to keep it available for community groups in that part of the city, there might not have been funding available from other levels of government. If we wanted to just maintain a center in that part of the city, no, we didn't look at that. As I said, I don't have a figure, but we're talking about millions of dollars with an S on the end, several millions of dollars to renovate the building. So we didn't, I mean, if that's council's wish, well, we'll have to address it. And are there some needs on the recreation sector? Has it been analyzed whether we need a building in that sector? Denis, you met with some groups. Denis, do you want to add anything? Well, right now, the main group was the soccer group. We had a number of meetings with them. And so the new building with the sanitary services will meet their needs. And it will also have access, give access to the schools and any soccer games that are held on the Dover. And I think there was some billiards in the basement, but I'm not sure quite what it was. But soccer, yes, we were in contact with soccer and the soccer Dieppe. Thank you. Any further questions? If not, let's continue on then.
Donc, au niveau des communications, on a une
Right, in
demande.
terms of communication, we have a one-off request for promotional items for welcoming our new residents, and also because in 2024 will be an anniversary of the aquatic center, so we want to celebrate that. In 2024, it'll be the 10th anniversary as well of our public participation policy, so we thought it would be a good time to review that policy. Any questions from councillors? Would appear not, so we will continue. Good evening. All right, in terms of immigration, we want to update the Dieppe immigration strategy. The first strategy is already expiring, so we want to update it. We also have collaboration with Dieppe, Moncton, and Revenue. So there's a basic agreement, a cost-sharing agreement with the cities for the initial costs, but this amount here, Greater Moncton is going to be developing its immigration strategy as well. So we're sharing the costs of that. There'll be a guide for newcomers, and there's a number of costs being shared. Any questions? Next. Mark. Oh, the other Mark. All right, sorry about that. My one-off request for 2024 is to buy a Guardium IMS emergency management system. I know that the council has asked a number of questions if we had it in a public alert system. So this would be a public alert system for major events, but also there would be a management software, and an application for intelligent devices. And it's to align with what Riverview and Moncton are doing. We would all have the same tools. All right, thank you. Any questions? No? All right, let's continue with leisure department. I'll be doing the next three. So the first one, the tourism has changed a lot since the pandemic. So we have our action plan 2023 that's coming to an end. And we've also hired a manager. So we just want to be able to position ourselves with regard to tourism. So we need a new strategy and an action plan. Event attraction strategy, we're going to try to see over the next 5 years, how do we target the right events, both sports and cultural? So how can we want to know, with the capacity that we have here in Dieppe, we want to work over the next 5 years. There's a number of events that are of interest to us. So this is a strategy, basically is to help us do things properly. And the next project it was done by Pauline Cormier, and I'll try to explain basically. I think she did a presentation on this a few weeks ago. It's the Women Trailblazers Name Bank. So the purpose is to put up, to pick names of trails, or to pick trail names based on women who made a contribution to Dieppe. Any questions? That's clear. All right, let's continue. Good evening, your worship, and councillors. So this is an implementation of a parking study. So we're asking for $24,000 so that we can implement the report recommendations that were tabled in 2022. And we want to improve signage and lighting. And we're also looking at other management pieces to this for parking. All right, any questions? Oh, the board is lighting up. Councillor Godbout. Well, we had talked about setting up signage on trails and that? Does that include that as well, or are you just talking about parking lots right now? This would be just parking lots, but to my knowledge, there is an effort to and it's in other budgets. All right, Councillor Lebouty. Thank you. It was kind of in the same direction. In the study, could they look at making our parking information available through the Greater Moncton website? I think it's great, by the way, that and we just saw this. We're using in the Greater Moncton. It would be great if we could use the same tools. It's to our advantage. We have purchasing power, but we also have I saw that in Moncton, their public lots or parking lots are available on their website. So we'd have to know what the cost would be, but it would be nice to include that. Anything else? All right, Councillor Godbout. And now, when we're talking about parking, are we just talking about vehicle parking? Are we looking at cycling or bike parking as well? The focus is on vehicles, but that's a good point that you brought up. We should look at active transportation parking. So there's an effort. I mean, there's a connection between the two there. So, all right, thanks. Anyone else? No? All right, let's continue. Ms. Spencer, good evening. All right, for the last request, Mr. Girard is not here, so I'm going to try to explain the ask. So as you know, with the growth that we've been seeing in recent years, we've seen a creation of 2,700 new dwellings recently. And there are two initiatives that are being proposed. So there's an urban growth strategy and a secondary plan for the sectors that to be developed. So what we want to do is we want to frame future development and involve the public so that they can help us in what kind of city they want to see. And these documents will also help us revisit the municipal plan and the zoning bylaw that will be done in 2025 and 2027. So it's just to allow us to do future planning. Right. At the 8th CD meeting last week, actually that was one of a discussion point that one of the things that we talked about the most. We had a number of presentations from the provincial government, and we talked about what we wanted to do in certain sectors and certain. So I can't talk about it right now here, but we've already talked about this at the council level. And there seems to be a lot of interest in taking rapid action at the provincial level. They're not necessarily known for their rapid action, but if things turn out, then we'll be okay. Oh, a question. Maybe Mr. Melançon would be best placed for this question. Can you tell us about the process for one-off requests? How does the city choose those projects? Well, we have so all the departments submitted projects. We received a lot more than what you see tonight. So we looked what was in line with our priorities and our future projects, and that's how we came to the list that you see here tonight. We do a comprehensive assessment to make sure that these projects are aligned with our own priorities, and also the question of order, what has to come first. And we also base the decision on our capacity, both financially and in terms of human resources. And I presume that with the talent that we have here in our city, that there were ideas that were presented, but were not deemed ready at this time to present, or maybe it wasn't the right order for whatever reason. But as part of your exercise, do you reevaluate those requests later in the year to see maybe if there were projects that were not ready in November, but that we could revisit, and is that part of your process? Yes. Now, of course, if there are opportunities that present themselves, we'll take a look at them. But I would also say that we incorporated 3 new departments. So there are things that have to be set up. There were actions that were taken quickly. So for example, the tree bylaw, we have to create teams to manage that bylaw successfully. And so if there are other opportunities though along the way that present themselves, we will look at them. But I would say that each department has quite a heavy load right now, and we'll be presenting that in our annual report. Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions, we'll continue with our presentation with our favorite treasurer. Thank you, Your Worship. All right, so thirdly, we've just talked about transfer reserves and one-off requests, but now we're looking at new expenses. So what is new and what is going to be continuing in the future year, in coming years? So here, the first thing is new HR applications, and that is it comes to $0.9 million approximately, and I'm going to ask my colleague who is here, Ms. Mario, to present the next 2 slides to you. Thank you, Mr. Thériault. Good evening, Your Worship, councillors. All right, now as Mr. Thériault mentioned, I have 2 slides that will list the new HR positions that we're proposing for 2024. The first 2, the first forestry manager and IT's technical support, these are 2 positions that we came to council for. So we came in 2023 to get your approval, and we received a special directive for those positions to fill them in 2023. However, we're including them here on the slide, and so that they're included concretely in the budget. That's why you see them here. So that's for the first 2. Now for the others, these are new positions. The first one is an HR and organizational services clerk. So this is a position that deals mainly with HR, but will also provide support to other departments, so IT, communications, finance, and continuous improvement. The next one is a development and construction consultant, or advisor rather. This is for planning and development services. That's in that department. The next position is a junior project engineering with the engineering department. And the last listed on this slide is a position of reservations clerk in the community affairs department. Now, and then for the next 2, well, for the next slide, on this slide, you see a geomatic specialist and an IT programmer analyst. So those two IT positions. We're also asking for 2 bylaw enforcement officers for the clerk's office. And I won't go into too much detail, but this is basically due to the increased size of the city. There are 3 conversions in public works, 4 conversions in facilities, and 5 hybrid conversions, and I'll explain what we mean by that. So that's basically 12 conversions that we're looking to do at the operational level, and it's in different departments. Now these are positions that currently exist, but they're auxiliary positions. So what we're asking is to convert them to full-time permanent positions. So instead of being, on the budget for 35 weeks, these positions would become full-time positions for 52 weeks. So that's basically the story of the 12 conversions. So we're proposing a new hybrid or 5 hybrid conversions. For a part of the year, the employee would work for public works, and then the other part they would be working for facilities. Now, so there are 9 positions in winter services and 12 conversions. So we're asking those to be converted to full-time positions. And that's all for me. Councillor Leboutier. Thank you, Worship. I just want some information, and I think I asked the same question last year, but I apologize, but I hope I remember this year. So in the overall cost, let me give you an example. So the $1.5 million of those requests is that, does that include pensions and all the total costs? All right. Thank you, Councillor. Could you remind me the number of employees that we have in the city? I think, I'm looking at Stéphane here, but I think we're at 220. So, I mean, this is a small ask in terms of numbers, but when you're looking at adding permanent positions and positions, I don't see any admin support positions, and I'm always worried that we're asking a lot. We're loading work onto our employees without giving them the admin support that they need to do the work that they've been hired to do. We're asking them to do management, but not. So what's the ratio that we have? When do you start looking at that as an issue? And when do you start looking at adding admin support for positions? I don't know of a ratio per se, but we're interested in knowing. Sometimes there's admin support for several departments. My door is always open to have those discussions with my colleagues, and we do have admin support positions already for certain divisions and certain departments. So, but in terms of the ratio, I don't think there's a magic number, but that's something that we continuously talk about. I think it's important that they talk about that on an active way, because things kind of there's a scope creep, and then all of a sudden it's not our intention, but people get overloaded. But I'm sensitive to that issue. So, any further questions? All right, thank you for your presentation. I just want to specify one thing for Ms. Leboutier. You mentioned $1.5 million, but we're talking about $900,000 of the 1.5, and then the $600,000 is what I'm going to be talking to you about now. So the other new requests, 600,000, we're talking about the RCMP that came and talked to us to ask for 4 more police officers and 3 office staff. So those are new expenses, and it represents about $200,000 in our budget. There's new software worth $35,000 that's being asked for. And we're talking about security software mostly here. We want to improve on-demand transportation, and in terms of, we want to provide services during holidays, so that's about $68,000. And there are musical events. We're setting a budget of $130,000 per year for that, to help with those events. There's $40,000 for a Pro Kids grant, and you might think that, well, yes, that already exists, but yes, it does exist, but last year, or in past years rather, we had one employee that was dedicated to that, but that employee is no longer with the city. And we had taken that budget and done other things with the money. So what we want to do now is to start again. We're going to provide a grant instead of dedicating an employment. We had thought of hiring somebody new, but we decided against that. We're going to be offering a grant instead. Here we're asking for $65,000 for programming, for Francophone programming, and $50,000 for consultations involving community groups, to help those groups out. I don't know if there are any questions on that, or if not, I'll go to the next slide. So that's all of the new asks for this year. Thank you. Okay, so the $200,000 for the RCMP for 4 police officers and 3 office staff, is that already included in what we're paying to the RCMP? Yes. It's the impact of their financial ask on our budget. So for us, it represents $200,000 more. Councillor Leboutier, I had the same question. Thank you. All right, next item. All right, asset management now, $1.2 million. When I talk about asset management, what I mean is in terms of the financial plan, one of the rules is that 25% of the general operating budget has to go towards asset manage. So we're talking about 3 components here that comprise asset management. So transaction capital, so that's the money that we take from the operating budget and that we send to the capital budget to pay for capital projects. There's $700,000 for the asset replacement program. So our assets that we want to take care of. So when it comes time to replace them, like so the fleet, for example, and so instead of going to borrow, we take the money here. And debt servicing. And this year, our debt servicing costs went down $400,000. So we're going to be paying some of that money cash, and so we won't have to borrow it. So as that amount decreases, that means that the other 2 components will increase because we'll always stay at that 25% figure. And then the last item is the existing expenses. So what do we have today, or that was there last year, that is continuing into, but that has increased, so it's more costly to provide those services. So our salaries, our employees, there was a salary increase of $1.7 million. It's a bit high. Well, it's about 6 to 7% of the salary mass. Now, there was a collective agreement that was settled this year, and that was not included in the 2023 budget. So we're catching up a bit here with this amount. So $1.7 million for all employees, though. We also have new services, as you know. We have immigration, environment, urban mobility, heritage. So those services need operational money. So that comes to about $150,000. Administrative costs. So our insurance, legal fees, those have gone up by $150,000. Property assessment costs, that's based on our tax base. And since our tax base went up, as I told you, about 12.5%, our property assessment costs have gone up then too. So that comes to $105,000. Mobility services, $100,000. And by mobility service, I mean Kodiak Transpo, the on-demand transit, things like that. Electricity is going up $100,000. And we're talking about street lighting mainly here. That's about $50,000. And then there's some facilities like the Aquatic Center and the Arts Center that have seen small increases in costs. Snow removal, $100,000. And that is mainly for the salt and sand that we buy and the snow clearing contracts and equipment rental. So the snow removal budget is about $1.2, $1.3 million, give or take. In brick repairs at Place 1604, we noticed that, thanks to the work that we did, and we're continuing that work in the future, but there'll be $100,000 that we'd like to dedicate to that work. Financial assistance incentives, $100,000. So last year, the incentives were about so they're going up by $100,000 this year. The Southeast Regional Services Commission, $90,000. So I'm going to try to go through this quickly, but basically last year, the amount had not increased, but there were a lot more services being offered by the RSC. So urban mobility, and I think there's 5, and I can't remember them all, but mobility, I just said that, tourism, transportation. But anyways, there were 5 new services offered, and that's an increase last year that was about $150,000 to $160,000. But the government, what they did was by reducing our funding that I talked about earlier, that was at $1.1 million last year, and it's down to $900,000, and it'll be decreased last year. So that money was taken and was given to the Regional Services Commission. So it didn't increase our costs because it was paid through that amount. Those services were paid through that amount. But this year, they didn't follow the same practice. So they reduced costs by 50% instead of 100%. So the municipalities are stuck paying more money. Okay, I talked about the destination levy earlier, $70,000. That's for destination Dieppe and Moncton. And we continue increasing the cost of water by $50,000. So I've been here for 15 years, and we always kind of we always increase it by $50,000 every year. Any questions on that? Councillor Godbout. Sorry about asking this again, but could you re-explain the $90,000 of the Regional Services Commission? I'm sorry, but I was listening attentively, but I understand part of what you're saying, but why are we at $90,000? Even though there are more services now being offered by them. All right, let's try this again. Sorry about that. So last year, the RSCs have offer services here that we have to pay for. The $160,000 last year was covered entirely by the province, but this year, only 50% of that amount is being covered. So, and it's 5 services. I don't know them by heart, but there are 5 services. And of those 5, the province pays 50% of those costs, so the municipality has to pay the other 50%. Okay, I think the thing that is confusing me is that if I look at our budget, the 5 services that they're supposed to be providing us, do we see those reflected in our budget? Is there a benefit for us because now they're the ones that are offering those services rather than the city doing it? So do we see that reduction in our budget elsewhere? Not necessarily, no. Are we seeing some benefits? That's a good question. No, we're not seeing any results yet. And yet actually Saturday, we were all invited, the councillor, we were all invited to a strategy meeting. And there's also the recreational facilities, social services for the Southeast region. Those are two other services that are part of the mandate of Regional Service Commission. So currently we're developing an action plan. So we haven't seen the results of what we're going to have seen. We're being consulted. We participate at each step. We have staff on each of the committees, but we want to make sure that we pay for the services that we receive, but we don't want to pay for services that we're already giving. So the province took funds away from us and they redirected that to the RSCs, and we can debate that, but that's how the situation is right now. Okay, thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Mélancon.
Thank you.
Donc là, on vient de passer à
So we just went through all of these new expenses and everything that explains why our budget went up by what it did, as I mentioned, 1.8 million. Now I'm going to go through the same thing, almost the same thing. Well, it is the same things, but through another angle. In other words, instead of looking at the new items, the one-offs, the transfers to the reserve, I'm going to look at them by department, by type of expense. So it's just another point of view. So once again, there's still 79 million total budget amount, but it's divided up into 7 types of expenses, if you will. Salaries, 24.7 million, an increase of 2.5 million. And that's the result of the 2.5 new positions, as well as the payroll. The external commissions, 13.4 increase. That's the RCMP here, 200,000, the 90,000 for the RSC, Kodiak Transpo, for example. The cost of water is going up. It's rounded off, but it's probably a $50,000 here. The operating capital is going up by $1.5 million for a total budget of 13 million. Debt service is now gone down by 400,000 to 6.2 million. The transfer to the reserves, an increase of 1.3 million to give a 2.1 million in the budget, and other operating expenses, 17.5 million to give us a total, well, which is a $2.5 million increase. And on the next 2 slides, I'm going to talk about these other expenses in a little more detail. And once again, here you'll see that it's the same expenses that we're going to talk about, but from another angle. So maintenance and repairs, $560,000 more for a total budget of 2.54 million. That includes the demolition of the Dover Center, the $115,000 for the building program, 100,000 for the bricks at place 1604, and 100,000 at the City Hall for maintenance, basically, and repairs into building and putting in 2 new offices. Electricity and heating, $100,000 more for 2.4 million. I mentioned earlier this 100,000 increase. Property taxes only went up by about 5,000 for a budget of almost $1 million. Snow removal, $110,000 increase for a total budget of 1.18 million. The assessment cost, I mentioned earlier, it's a 97,000, almost $1 million. And sports fields for $580,000. That's a decrease of $240,000. That's because there were the $200,000 at the Music Arts Center that we're doing this year, that were undertaken this year, and $48,000 for signage on trails. There was a question on that earlier. Yeah, well, that'll be done this year because it was forecast for this year, in 2023, actually. Communication, an increase of 25,000 for a total budget of 650,000. Grants and subsidies, $77,000, an increase of $165,000. And we talked about $130,000 for events through Musicard and different studies and agreements, an increase of $685,000 for a total budget of almost 1.8 million. We've already talked about this. We've talked about the urban growth strategy that Ms. Spencer mentioned, $235,000, $330,000 for administration, the feasibility study for the market, for example, the initiative for francophonie, as well as the strategic plan, and $100,000 for different financial incentives, which went from $500,000 to $600,000. Now, other expenses program, an increase of $158,000 for a total budget of $660,000. 2 points to note that Mr. Denis already mentioned, but community group support, as well as I can't even read my writing here, sorry, but it's for Francophone events. Insurance, an increase of $100,000, especially in terms of liability. Insurance, $600,000 budget. Tourism, $500,000 budget, out of which an increase of $190,000. Once again, this is the accommodation levy that is going up, as well as different one-time expenses. IT, an increase of $50,000 for a total budget of $430,000. Supplies, and here I don't want to go into the detail, but these are small amounts. But supplies, council, legal fees, 600,000 for 440,000, 380,000, 320,000. New services, the four that I've already mentioned, for a total of $150,000. These are new expenses, new costs, and other expenses that are not identified here, but that in theory are lower than $200,000 each. That's a $200,000 increase. And for example, this would be security services. You see the security services that we want to increase. There's also $32,000 for traffic signs, as well as other expenses of that type, for a total of $200,000. Now, for the external commissions, there was a question on this earlier. The police services came up with a proposal. They asked for $8.68 million, which is a $200,000 that I mentioned earlier, that increase of $200,000 compared to the previous year. I'm going to put an asterisk there, but this police service in 2022, in 2021, sorry, they had suffered a deficit of $1 million. In 2022, they had a surplus of $2 million. So that's from minus $1 million to a plus $2 million, and that appears in the 2024 budget. So for us, that $3 million difference, and if we take 20% of that, it's about $600,000. So there was a savings just of this $600,000. So the RCMP was asking for $800,000 if we remove that surplus, but the surplus had a negative impact of $600,000. It gives us just a small increase of 200,000. But in fact, there was a 9% increase being asked for from the RCMP. The mobility services, this is an increase of $187,000 for a total budget of $1.73 million. And by mobility, I mean that includes Kodiak transport, but it also includes on-demand service, the shuttle service, the bus taxi. And Jeremy, I know, yeah, you're probably looking at me saying you're missing one, and yes, I am missing one, but it's not coming to me right now. Adapted transportation, thank you, that's the one. Expansion Dieppe as well. Now we are proposing the same budget as last year, $1.1 billion. Solid waste, an increase of $10,000 for a total budget of 1.5 million. The Regional Service Commission, and I think I already explained this when I tried to explain it at least a little earlier, $90,000 increase for a total budget of $240,000. And Capitol Theatre, same amount as last year, 75,000, which gives us a total of $13.4 million overall. And I'm talking about external commissions, but they're rather external vendors or suppliers because it's a mix of suppliers and commissions. I mean, all of these services that are offered externally to the city. So that's it for the budget, the 2024 general operating budget. But before I move on, do you have any questions on this? Questions from council? Councillor Leboutier. Yes, thank you. I have a question. I've sat here for a few years already. I've participated in the budget exercise. Is it possible to ask these external commissions to use a standard format, at least to allow us to compare year over year? We received the reports this year and previous years, and to ensure some sort of uniformity between the three municipalities. I think we should be able to have some sort of presentation that is standard. It would certainly be helpful for all of these services. And as you just explained, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but figures, you can get figures to talk any way you want, figures and statistics. It's important to compare apples to apples, to be able to validate, to compare year over year, and to see if it's changing. Is it better? Is it worse? Instead of getting a new presentation every year. So that's what I would recommend. We see our growth. We see a population that is a city that is growing, and our structure administratively, that the HR has to adapt to these changes, and we need a structure and the people to allow us to move forward. Thank you. That's all. Thank you. Other comments? Let's continue on. 5-year plan. Okay, now here is when we take out our crystal ball for what we're predicting for the next 5 years. Yeah, next 5 years. So you can see that on my left, you can see the increase of the tax base for the next years. This year it was 12.7%. I mentioned 12.5% earlier. That was for Dieppe. 12.7 is for the greater Dieppe area, including the 2 former LSDs. That's why it was 12.5 before, 12.7 here. In 2025, we're banking on an 8% increase. It could go down, like it could remain at the same level. We don't know, but we try and be cautious in our budget forecast. So we're just bringing it down somewhat. And 2025, the reason we put 8% and a little less in 2026, that's really just an estimate, but there is a change going on in the government in terms of residential assessments. Currently, the value that we have is the value that they estimate the building will have as of January 1st, 2024. It's a future date. This year, they announced that starting in 2025, they're going to perform these assessments, but based on a date in the past. So instead of having an assessment based on January of next year, it would be the current year. So for in 2025, the house that I mentioned earlier that is now worth $465,000, well, in theory, the following year, it will still be assessed at $465,000 because this year we're looking at January 1st, 2024. The following year, they will also use the date of January 1st, 2024. So in theory, there shouldn't be a big increase in the assessment value of the houses in 2025 because it's going to be using the same reference amount than in 2024. The only thing that will increase are new construction, of course. But secondly, and this is what I mentioned at the very beginning, it's not quite as clear, but there have been increases for the next last 3 years of 15, 25, and 8%. Well, I don't know yet. I mean, that's just an estimate, but it's still 48 to 50% increase for a residence in the city of Dieppe over the last 3 years.
Ou la province, avec
The government or the province with their increased protection program, they set the limit at 10%. So over 3 years, we're going to get 30% over 3 years. So that means that there is another 20% to go and get for the next 2 years. So even if the province sets the same evaluation, the municipality will be able to go get another 10% increase through the protection that will be. So that's where my 8% comes from with my estimates. You know, in terms of the 10% that will be available to us. So we should be able to get at least 8%, maybe even more, but we'll see next year. Property taxes, we're proposing a reduction of 3 cents, and then that should remain stable for the following years. But we'll have the same conversation next year. So if we come up with, if we have a 13% increase, then we could talk about it at that time. But for now, if it's at 8%, we shouldn't be raising or decreasing the rates. In terms of the capital budget now, these are big amounts, 31 million, 42 million in 2026, and so forth. For borrowing, we're 7.4% this year, 4.6, and then 13.7, 3.1. In terms of the 7.4, now I'm doing some work. I'm in the process of doing work, and I want to make sure that, how can I say this? I want to have a good handle on what I can transfer to the reserves this year with the surplus. So that's work that I have to do. And basically what I'm trying to tell you is that there might be more money in the reserve that we'll be able to use for 2024 projects. So that number might come down to 7.4. So we might by maybe $1 or $2 million. So I'll talk to you more about that in 2 weeks on November 14th. So there might be a decrease in borrowing, which is good news. But with 7.4, the debt to equity ratio, or the indebtedness ratio, is 7-8%, and it should then stabilize between 8.6% and 8%. And now I know my colleague has already mentioned this, but last week actually, but the financial plan was written in 2018 and it has to be revised, and it hasn't yet been revised. There are things that we're doing now that are not in the financial plan. So the borrowing in the financial plan, it says we have to go by $1.5 million. Now we're far from $1.5 million. So what we're going to be proposing in the new financial plan is to stay below the 10% debt ratio. So instead of having a set amount for the amount that we can borrow, we're going to commit to not going beyond a certain percentage. And that's if the province allows us. So that is the end of my presentation in terms of the general operating budget. Are there any questions? Councillor Le Boutier, yes. All right, in terms of borrowing, Now, there's borrowing, but then there are borrowing costs. So is the $10 million that I borrow today in 2023, or I might have been able to borrow $12 million at the same cost, but is it, maybe our ratio should be 8 or 9% instead of 10%? I've got it now at 5%. My estimates are at 5%. Now, the last borrowing we did was at 4%, and I know that the inflation rates have gone up since then slightly, but I estimate them to be at about 5%. So the ratio is good. But if we get to 6%, then yes, the ratio will increase a little bit, but not by much. It's minimal in terms of an increase. All right, thank you. But you're confirming that you do look at all those strategies. Okay, right. Thank you. All right, the moment we've all been waiting for. Right, it won't be long.
J'essaie juste de faire apparaître.
I'm just trying to get the slide up here, and I'm trying to get the other budget projected. Can you share it?
Celui-ci, numéro 1. Et voilà, merci bien.
There we go, thank you.
Il a voulu se faire attendre, pareil.
It wanted us to wait for it.
Donc, voilà au budget.
All right, so now we're at the water and sewer budget. So this should be a little quicker to present. So first of all, we're talking about the rates. The rates should remain at 948, the same thing as in 2022. So no changes, or 2023 rather, no changes in that regard. Now, what does that mean in terms of budgets? So the budget is at $16.1 million. So water and sewer represent about $12.5 million. And that amount is an increase of about $900,000 over the previous budget. Now, the reason is because the number of units increased by about 900 units. And of those 900 units, 335 of them are at a fixed rate, so residences, for example, and 650 increased in the non-residential, in institutional, commercial, and industrial. So basically apartments. And we can see them. These apartments are going up, buildings are going up a bit around the city. So that increases our water and sewer costs. There are general operating fund, $2.2 million. And then there's other revenue of $1.38 million. And here we're talking about a number of things. So surpluses from previous years, $600,000 from 2022. There's also reserve transfers, $368,000 to pay for the one-off expenses that you'll be seeing soon in upcoming slides. So that's basically what the $1.38 million is made up of. Now, let's look at expenses. Now, this is the same format that we had earlier. So I'm taking the 2023 budget, which was $14.7 million. We remove the transfers to the reserve and the one-off costs for 2023. So about $800,000 rather, to a core budget of $14.1 million. So the one-offs of 2024. So there are four components, and the total is $16.1 million. So there's a one-off $0.37 million, the new projects $1.13 million, and the transfer $0.86. And we'll be seeing more details on these in upcoming slides. So first of all, let's take the one-shot costs or one-off costs. $293,000 for 2024, and we'll see the details on that in the next slide, but just keep that in mind for now. I'll talk about that in 2 minutes. The two others, so the $60,000 and the $15,000, so the first is for the water master plan and the flow monitoring with Transat, because those were two one-off projects that were supposed to be done in 2022. 23, they were not carried down, so we're including that in this year's budget. For new projects for 2024, $125,000, what we're talking about is the water and sewers portion of the new positions that we discussed. We had talked about $900,000 for new positions, and there is a water and sewer portion of those new positions. So basically, we're talking about $1 million in general. So $900,000 plus the $125,000. Point three, transfer to reserve of $860,000. So the $600,000 is a surplus from 2022, and then there's an anticipated surplus amount for 2024 that I talked about earlier. So $260,000. Now, in terms of the $300,000 of one-off asks, I'll read them, and if you have questions, Mr. Book is here, or Mr. Colmy might be able can answer you. So in terms of the water department, we're talking about $62,000 for the risk analysis of our electrical switches. I don't know what that is, but it's $62,000. There's the large counter calibration of 2 inches and over. We want to calibrate them and make sure that they will control. So that's $61,000. Conversion of fire pumps at the airport pumping station to various pumps. So we're looking at $40,000 for that. In terms of the sewer, we are wanting to buy a new Gulf generator, a new LS generator situated near Gulf Street, $55,000. And then the last point is we're looking to development and to the future, and we will probably need a pumping station. So this amount is for a pre-design study for the Melançon Road North pumping station. So $75,000. So the total is $293,000. I don't know if do you have any questions on that table? Not yet. Okay. Questions? Inaudible. Okay, we're almost done. All right. So now let's talk about existing expenses. So expenses that were there and that are continuing. So salaries. We're talking about a salary increase of $340,000. Basically the same explanations that I gave earlier. Water purchase, we are talking about $150,000. So basically, we buy water from the neighboring city, and those costs will increase by 1 cent per cubic meter. So we are also going to be buying a bit more water. So instead of $3.3 million cubic meters, we'll be going to 3.4 million cubic meters. And I say this every year, but these amounts, 3.3 million to 3.4 million cubic meters, is basically the same amounts that we bought in 2012 and 2013. So over the last 12 years, even if the city is growing, the quantity of water that we're purchasing from our neighboring city is basically the same. And I'm impressed every time I see that amount. So our residents are using water properly. They're buying accessories that are efficient for their washing their dishes, but so really we're not buying more water than we bought than we had bought 12 years ago. All right, here we are at $150,000 for the operating capital and active management program. Debt servicing, now we paid over $700,000 to in cash, so that had a positive impact. That will have a positive in the future. We're giving $165,000 more to Transaqua, which is normal because we have more units of water, so the costs go up. And then we have miscellaneous operating expenses, and we're talking about legal fees. We have a big court case right now with water and sewer, pumping stations, maintenance, that type of thing. Water meters as well. We want to buy more because we are the ones that provide the meters for apartments, so we need a few more, and so forth. So that's where that $320,000 comes from.
Maintenant, ce qu'on regarde le budget en son ensemble.
Now, if we look at the budget overall, the $16.1 million budget, which is an increase of 1.4 million. Well, 470,000 comes from salaries. The purchase of water, as we mentioned earlier, 115,000. The wastewater treatment, $165,000, and so on, gives a total of 2.7. The operating capital, 115,000. The debt service has gone down by 310,000 for a budget of 2.45 million. Operations, water and sewage, a little over 2.3 million, for an increase of 390,000 and $200,000. That's for all of the new items that I presented, as well as the one-time expenses. All of those are found in these two figures. Transfer to the reserves, $240,000 increase for a total of 860,000. And the deficit of the previous year of $670,000 per year, $1,000, that should end in 2024. So that's it for the budget. But if you have any questions before we move on to the 5-year plan, which is my last slide, it would seem that everybody is quite in agreement. So for the 5-year plan for water and sewage, for the unit rate, what are we expecting? It's given that the number of units is going up considerably every year, which means we don't really have to increase our costs very much. So that should remain stable for the next 3 years. It would remain at $948 in 2024, 25, and 26. But after that, it should go up slightly every year to $964 in 2027, $980 in 2028. But this increase will be if in case of loans that are coming up, and it'll cost more to service these loans. The operating budget is going down to, well, in 2024, it would be 16.1 million. It should go down to 15.6% because the deficit of $670,000 will disappear. So that'll reduce the expenses, but then after that, it starts going back up somewhat. Capital projects go from 7.7 million to 17 million in 2026. That's a number of big projects. And borrowing from 3.3 million to 5.2 to 6.2 to 5.2, 4.2. So these are, considerable loans for a budget that is somewhat smaller than the general operating budget. And the debt ratio will go from 17%, and 17% is the lowest rate we've been at for the last number of years, but it should go back up somewhat, up to reach 21.2% in 2028 because of the borrowing that we're expecting. And as I mentioned earlier, the financial plan that has not been drafted yet for water and sewage, should have a component on the debt ratio, and the province, because this is a utility budget, we can go up to 50% of the debt rate of a debt ratio. But in this case, we're going up to 21. What I would suggest in our financial plan is we go halfway. We go to what half of what the province is recommended or authorizes, but for a maximum of 25%, which would be half of what the province authorizes. And that wraps up the general and the water and sewage general operating budgets for 2024. Thank you. Questions, comments from council? If not, but thank you for all of these detailed explanations with all of the figures in tow. I see that some of your colleagues still have their eyes wide open, thinking, how does he do it? Yes, I'm sure. I mean, we just spent an hour and a half or 2 hours on this. I'm sure has spent a lot more time on this than that. So congratulations once again. I think that all of questions from council have been answered consistently, and I think that every year, especially for the newer members around the table, they're starting to understand the system better and the process taken by our staff along with administration in order to be able to present these figures to us. As a community, I don't think we need to look at our neighbors with envy. I think we are leaders in every aspect of this. So thank you. Thank you for making us look so good. And we will continue the process. And we can't wait to officially adopt, to vote on and adopt the, what's the word I'm looking for? The budget. Thank you. The budget for at the next meeting of council. Until then, if you have any questions, of course, we will send them directly to the CAO, who will send them to the right person. I doubt that there would be a great number of them, however, but thank you. That's all for this evening. Thank you. Have a great evening, all of you.